Have you ever had someone look you in the eye and tell you that your greatest passion, the thing you've dedicated your entire life to perfecting, made them physically ill? The cold shock of those words, the burn of humiliation that follows, and that hollow feeling when the person you love most sits silently beside the critic, offering no defense. That moment changed everything for me. It was the day I realized that sometimes the most powerful response isn't a fiery comeback, but a dignified silence, especially when you're hiding an ace up your sleeve that no one sees coming. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Caroline Weber. For 37 years, I've lived in the same brick house on Maple Street in Riverdale. It's the house where I raised my son Michael, where I nursed my husband through his final illness, and where I've hosted countless Sunday dinners around my oak dining table. To my neighbors, I'm just the pleasant widow who grows heirloom tomatoes and brings homemade focaccia to community potlucks. To my son, I'm just Mom, the woman who packed his lunches and taught him to scramble eggs when he was 9. What no one in Riverdale knows, what almost no one knows at all, is that I'm also Chef Caroline, the owner and executive chef of the Blackbird, the restaurant that's held a Michelin star for the past 8 years and has been called the Crown Jewel of Riverdale's dining scene by the Tribune's food critic. I never set out to keep my restaurant a secret. It just happened that way. When my husband David and I opened the Blackbird 26 years ago, we agreed that he would handle the front of house while I created the menu and ran the kitchen. After he passed away 12 years ago, I hired a charismatic young man named James to become the face of the restaurant, while I remained behind the scenes, creating the seasonal menus that kept critics raving and reservations booked 3 months in advance. The arrangement suited me. I've never craved the spotlight. For me, the joy has always been in the creation, in transforming raw ingredients into experiences that move people. I don't need my name in lights. I just need to know that what I've made has brought happiness to someone's day. Which brings me to Alexis. It was a Thursday evening in October when Michael first mentioned her name. I was in my kitchen at home, kneading dough for the next morning's cinnamon rolls, a ritual that helps me unwind after a long day at the restaurant. The phone rang, and I tucked it between my ear and shoulder, hands still covered in flour. "Mom, I've met someone," Michael said, his voice charged with the kind of excitement I hadn't heard since he was a boy opening Christmas presents. "Tell me everything," I replied, smiling at the happiness in his voice. Alexis Kingston was a marketing executive who'd recently transferred to the Riverdale office of her firm. Michael had met her at a client meeting. He's an architect with a growing reputation for innovative commercial spaces. They'd been dating for 3 weeks, and he was smitten. "She's brilliant, Mom. Harvard MBA, manages accounts for luxury brands. She's traveled everywhere: Paris, Tokyo, Barcelona." The admiration in his voice was palpable. "And wait until you meet her. She's stunning." "She sounds wonderful," I said, genuinely pleased to hear such joy in my son's voice. At 34, Michael had dated plenty, but had never seemed truly serious about anyone. "When do I get to meet this remarkable woman?" "Actually," he hesitated, "I was hoping to bring her to Sunday dinner this weekend. If that's okay?" "Of course it's okay," I assured him. "I'll make something special." "About that?" Michael's tone shifted slightly. "Alexis is really into food. Like, seriously into it. She follows all these famous chefs on Instagram, eats at all the top-rated places. She's even taken cooking classes in France." I chuckled. "Well, I may not be a French chef, but I think I can manage to impress her with a good home-cooked meal." "I know, Mom. Your cooking is amazing. He paused. "I guess I'm just nervous. I really like her, and I want her to like you too." "Just be yourself," I advised. "And I'll be myself. If she's as wonderful as you say, we'll get along fine. After we hung up, I stood in my kitchen, hands deep in dough, thinking about what to prepare for Sunday dinner. I wanted to make something that showcased my skill without seeming like I was trying too hard. Something elegant but comforting. Eventually, I settled on my signature coq au vin, a dish I'd perfected over decades, and that had been on the Blackbird's menu in various incarnations since we opened. Sunday arrived, crisp and bright with autumn sunshine. I spent the morning preparing, chopping vegetables with the precision that comes from years of professional training, reducing the sauce to the perfect consistency, selecting herbs from my garden. By 4 o'clock, my house was filled with the rich aroma of braised chicken. The table was set with my grandmother's china, and a bottle of Pinot Noir was breathing on the counter. At precisely 5, the doorbell rang. I smoothed my apron, took a breath, and opened the door to meet the woman who had captivated my son. Alexis Kingston was, as Michael had said, stunning. Tall and slender, with sleek dark hair cut into a precise bob, she wore a cream cashmere sweater, tailored black pants, and heels that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She offered a practiced smile and extended a hand. "Caroline, it's so lovely to meet you. Michael talks about you constantly." Her handshake was firm, professional. I noticed her perfectly manicured nails, the diamond tennis bracelet at her wrist, the subtle designer logo on her handbag. Everything about her spoke of careful curation. Michael stood beside her, watching us with hopeful eyes. I smiled warmly and invited them in, offering drinks as we settled in the living room. As I poured wine, I noticed Alexis scanning my home, taking in the comfortable but well-worn furniture, the bookshelves filled with cookbooks, the lack of anything visibly expensive or impressive. "Your home is so quaint," she said, in a tone that suggested she was searching for something polite to say. "Very homey." "Thank you," I replied simply. "I've lived here over 30 years. It's seen a lot of life." "Michael mentioned you're a homemaker?" she asked, sipping her wine. I glanced at my son, who looked slightly uncomfortable. "I cook," I said, "among other things." "Mom's being modest," Michael jumped in. "She's an incredible cook. Wait until you taste dinner." Alexis smiled. "I'm looking forward to it. Though I should warn you, I'm a bit of a food snob. Occupational hazard from all the client dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants." I nodded, amused by the irony she couldn't possibly understand. "We all have our standards," I agreed. "Shall we move to the table? Everything's ready." In the dining room, I brought out the first course, a simple salad of heirloom greens with roasted pears, blue cheese, and candied walnuts in a white balsamic vinaigrette. As I served, I noticed Alexis examining the presentation with a critical eye. "This looks lovely," she said, but her tone was measured, as if she were a judge on a cooking show offering obligatory praise before the critique. I took my seat and watched as she took her first bite, noting the slight furrow of her brow as she analyzed the flavors. "The dressing is interesting," she commented, "though I usually prefer something with more acidity to cut through the richness of the cheese." Michael quickly chimed in. "I think it's perfect, Mom, just like always." I simply smiled and continued eating. This wasn't the first time someone had critiqued my food, and I'd long ago learned that taste is subjective. What mattered to me was the care I'd put into the preparation. When I brought out the main course, coq au vin served with buttery mashed potatoes and glazed carrots, Alexis's expression shifted from polite interest to barely concealed skepticism. "Oh," she said, staring at the rustic presentation. "This is very traditional." "Family recipe," I explained, serving Michael, who was already eagerly reaching for the serving spoon. Alexis took a small portion of everything, arranging it carefully on her plate. She cut a tiny piece of chicken, tasted it, and nodded with the same measured politeness. It's nice. Though I recently had the most amazing modern interpretation of coq au vin at the Blackbird downtown. They use a sous vide technique that keeps the meat incredibly tender, and they incorporate some unexpected flavors, star anise, I think, and perhaps a hint of citrus. It completely elevates the dish beyond the home cooking version. I felt a small jolt at the mention of my restaurant. The Blackbird? I've heard good things about it. Oh, it's exceptional, Alexis enthused, suddenly animated. The chef there is a genius. Every dish tells a story. It's not just food, it's an experience. She turned to Michael. We should go sometime, if we can get a reservation. It's nearly impossible unless you book months in advance. I'd like that, Michael said, then quickly added. But honestly, nothing beats Mom's cooking for me. I grew up on this food. Alexis smiled indulgently. That's sweet. There's certainly something to be said for nostalgia and food. Though once you've experienced truly elevated cuisine, it's hard to go back to. She gestured vaguely at her plate. Basics. I kept my expression neutral, even as I registered the dismissal in her words. Everyone has different tastes, I said mildly. What matters is that the food is prepared with care. Oh, absolutely, Alexis agreed quickly. And this is perfectly fine for a home-cooked meal. I'm just spoiled by my experiences with professional chefs, I suppose. Though we continued eating, the conversation drifting to safer topics. Michael's current architectural project, Alexis's recent business trip to Chicago, local news. But the undercurrent had been established. In Alexis's eyes, I was merely a mother who cooked adequately for her family, nothing more. The irony that she had unknowingly compared my home cooking unfavorably to my own restaurant cuisine wasn't lost on me. As I served dessert, a classic tarte tatin with homemade vanilla bean ice cream, Alexis took one bite, then set down her spoon. Is everything all right? I asked, noting her expression. It's just very rich, she said apologetically. And to be honest, all this heavy food isn't sitting well with me. I have a sensitive system when it comes to traditional cooking. All the butter and cream. She placed a hand delicately on her stomach. I hate to say it, but I'm feeling a bit sick. Michael looked mortified. Alexis, Mom went to a lot of trouble. It's fine, I interrupted smoothly. Not everyone has the same tolerance for traditional French cuisine. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. It can be rich. Alexis reached for her water. I'm sure it's delicious for those who enjoy this style of cooking. I'm just used to more modern, lighter preparations. Like at the Blackbird, their desserts are these beautiful, delicate creations. Technical masterpieces, really. I nodded, accepting the comparison without comment. Inside, though, I felt a pang of something, not quite hurt, not quite amusement, but a strange mixture of both. The tarte tatin she had just dismissed was literally the same recipe served at the Blackbird, where it was one of our most requested desserts. As the evening wound down, Alexis thanked me with practiced politeness. Dinner was traditional. Thank you for having me. Her tone made it clear that traditional wasn't a compliment. After they left, I stood in my kitchen, slowly washing dishes and thinking about the evening. I wasn't angry or offended, not really. Alexis's reaction was nothing new. I'd encountered plenty of self-proclaimed foodies over the years who confused novelty with quality, who valued presentation over flavor, who thought dining at expensive restaurants made them experts. What troubled me was Michael, the way he'd looked at Alexis with such admiration, even as she subtly belittled his mother's cooking. The way he'd only half-heartedly defended me. I wondered if he was so enamored with her sophistication, her worldliness, that he couldn't see the lack of graciousness beneath the polished surface. That night, I called my sous chef, Elena, to check in on the evening service at the Blackbird. Everything went perfectly, chef, she assured me. Sold out of the halibut special by 8, and 3 different tables sent compliments on the tart. Tatin. I smiled to myself. Thanks, Elena. I'll see you tomorrow. As I hung up, I wondered what Alexis would say if she knew that the genius chef she so admired was the same woman whose cooking had just made her feel sick. I didn't have to wonder long. Over the next few months, Michael and Alexis's relationship intensified. She became a regular at my Sunday dinners, always with the same polite disdain for my traditional cooking, always with a comparison to some trendy restaurant, often, ironically, to the Blackbird. The chef at the Blackbird changes the menu seasonally, she informed me one Sunday in January, picking at my beef bourguignon. They're doing this amazing winter citrus theme right now. Grapefruit-cured salmon, blood orange reduction with duck, breast. It's innovative, vibrant. That's what's exciting about modern cuisine. It's always evolving, not stuck in the past. I nodded, suppressing a smile. I had, in fact, developed that citrus-themed menu myself, inspired by a particularly good shipment from a Florida citrus grove I'd been working with for years. Perhaps you're right, I said mildly, though there's something to be said for dishes that have stood the test of time. Alexis gave me a patronizing smile. That's such a mom thing to say. No offense, but there's a reason home cooking and professional cuisine are different worlds. Michael, who had been quietly eating, finally spoke up. Mom's cooking is professional. Quality, Alexis. She's been doing this her whole life. It's sweet that you think that, Alexis said, patting his hand. But there's a difference between cooking for family and what real chefs do. It's like comparing a kid's crayon drawing to a Picasso. I saw a flash of something in Michael's eyes, a momentary resistance, quickly suppressed. He changed the subject, and the moment passed. But I noticed it, that first small crack in his admiration. In March, Michael called with news. I proposed to Alexis last night, he said, his voice a mixture of excitement and anxiety. She said yes. Oz, congratulations, I said, genuinely wanting my son's happiness despite my reservations about his choice. I'm happy for you both. There's something else, he continued. Alexis wants to have the engagement party at the Blackbird. She's obsessed with the place, as you know. I told her it's nearly impossible to book for events, but she's determined. I hesitated, considering my options. For years, I had kept my professional life separate from my identity as Michael's mother. It wasn't a deliberate secret so much as a boundary between different parts of my life. Michael knew I worked. He assumed I did part-time catering and consultation, which wasn't entirely untrue, but he had no idea about the Blackbird. Actually, I said carefully, I might be able to help with that. I know someone at the Blackbird. Seriously? Michael sounded surprised. Since when? I've done some work with them over the years, I said, which was technically true. Let me make a call and see what I can do. Later that week, I called Michael back. Good news, the Blackbird can host your engagement party on April 12th. They have a private dining room that would be perfect. Mom, that's amazing, Michael exclaimed. Alexis is going to flip. She's been trying to get a dinner reservation there for months, and now we're having our engagement party there. How did you manage it? Like I said, I know people, I replied. Now, about the menu. Alexis wants to speak with the chef directly, Michael interrupted. She has very specific ideas about what she wants served. Could you put her in touch with your contact? I suppressed a sigh. Let me see what I can arrange. The next day, I had my assistant at the Blackbird call Alexis, explaining that she was speaking on behalf of Chef Caroline, who would be happy to create a custom menu for the engagement party. Alexis, predictably, had a list of demands, specific dishes from our regular menu, modifications to classic recipes, particular ingredients that had to be included. My assistant, well-trained, told her that Chef Caroline would take her requests under advisement, but would ultimately design a menu that best showcased the restaurant's strengths while honoring the special occasion. The client seemed particular. my assistant told me afterward, her diplomatic description making me smile. "I'm familiar with the type," I assured her. The night of the engagement party arrived. I had arranged for James, my front of house manager, to host the event while I remained in the kitchen, overseeing the preparation of each course. Through the pass, I could see the private dining room where 20 guests, mostly Alexis's colleagues and friends with a few of Michael's closest friends, gathered to celebrate. Alexis was resplendent in a designer dress, moving through the room with the confident grace of someone who knows they belong in exclusive spaces. Michael, handsome in his tailored suit, watched her with a mixture of pride and something else. Something that, from my vantage point, looked almost like uncertainty. I had crafted a special menu for the occasion, elevated versions of dishes I knew Michael loved, interspersed with the seasonal specialties that had made the Blackbird famous. Each plate that left my kitchen was perfect, balancing flavor, texture, and presentation in a way that only comes from decades of refinement. From the kitchen, I heard the appreciative murmurs as each course was served. And most satisfyingly, I heard Alexis's voice rising above the others, praising each dish in the same effusive terms she had once used to dismiss my home cooking. "The balance of flavors is exceptional," she gushed to the table at large. "This is exactly what I've been trying to explain to Michael about the difference between home cooking and true culinary artistry." During the dessert course, an assortment of miniature versions of our most popular desserts, including the tarte tatin she had once claimed made her feel ill, James approached the table. "Chef Caroline hopes you're enjoying your evening," he said smoothly. "She's prepared a special champagne toast for the couple." As the champagne was poured, Alexis leaned toward James. "Please convey our deepest appreciation to the chef. Every dish has been magnificent. In fact, I'd love to speak with her personally if possible." James glanced toward the kitchen, catching my eye. I gave a slight shake of my head. "I'm afraid Chef Caroline is quite busy ensuring that your final courses are perfect," he replied diplomatically. "But she sends her warmest congratulations and hopes to meet you another time." Alexis looked momentarily disappointed but recovered quickly. "Of course. Please tell her this has been the most extraordinary dining experience, so far beyond anything else in this town." I watched as Michael's expression flickered slightly at her words. He knew, better than anyone, how often she had compared my cooking unfavorably to the very food she was now praising, without realizing both came from the same hands. After the party, when all the guests had departed except for Michael and Alexis, I removed my chef's coat, smoothed my hair, and walked out into the dining room in my regular clothes. Michael's eyes widened in surprise. "Mom, what are you still doing here? I thought you said you couldn't make it because you had a work commitment." "I did," I said simply, gesturing around the restaurant. "This is my work commitment." Alexis looked between us, confusion evident on her face. "I don't understand. What are you doing here?" "Caroline," James approached, impeccable in his suit. "Everything went perfectly. The guests were most impressed." "Thank you, James," I replied. "We've worked together for many years," I explained to Michael and Alexis, "since shortly after your father passed away." Michael's confusion was turning to understanding, his eyes widening as the pieces fell into place. "Mom, are you saying you work here? At the Blackbird?" "Not exactly," I said, meeting his gaze steadily. "I own the Blackbird. I'm Chef Caroline." The silence that followed was profound. Alexis's perfectly composed facade cracked, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Michael looked stunned, then, to my relief, a slow smile spread across his face. "You're Chef Caroline?" Alexis finally managed, her voice higher than usual. "The Chef Caroline? But that's not possible. You're a mom who cooks?" I supplied. "Yes, I'm that too." "But all this time," she gestured helplessly. All those Sunday dinners were prepared by the same hands that created tonight's menu, I confirmed. Though at home, I cook what brings me joy and what I know my son loves. Here, I create experiences for guests who come with different expectations. Michael started laughing, a genuine free sound I hadn't heard from him in months. "Mom, this is incredible. Why didn't you ever tell me?" "It started as a boundary between parts of my life," I explained. "After your father died and you went to college, I needed something that was just mine. By the time the Blackbird became successful, it felt strange to suddenly announce it. And honestly, I enjoyed the separation. At home, I'm just Caroline. Here, I get to be Chef Caroline. Both are true parts of me." Alexis remained silent, her face flushed with what I imagined was the dawning realization of every dismissive comment she had made about my cooking over the past months, every comparison between home cooking and the Blackbird's cuisine. "Your coq au vin," she said finally, her voice small. "The one you served the first time we met. It's the same as the one on your winter menu here." "Yes," I acknowledged, "with a few plating differences. Food tastes different when it's served on fine china under ambient lighting, doesn't it?" Michael reached for my hand. "Mom? I had no idea. All these years. I'm so proud of you." His words touched me deeply. "Thank you, Michael." "I should have known," he continued, shaking his head. "The way you move in the kitchen, how you never use recipes, the way you can identify every spice in a dish at a restaurant. I just never connected the dots." I squeezed his hand. "It's easy to miss what's right in front of us sometimes." Alexis had regained some of her composure. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "I've been so presumptuous." "We all make judgments based on incomplete information," I said, not unkindly. "The question is what we do when we discover we've been wrong." The three of us stood in the empty restaurant, the weight of revelation hanging in the air between us. It wasn't just my identity as Chef Caroline that had been exposed that night. It was the subtle pattern of assumptions, judgments, and values that had defined our interactions for months. In that moment, I saw something shift in Michael's eyes as he looked at his fiancée. It wasn't a dramatic change, but a quiet recalibration, the beginning of seeing more clearly what had been obscured by infatuation and admiration. I didn't know what would happen next for them. Whether this revelation would be a moment of growth or the beginning of the end. But I knew that I had finally stepped fully into my own truth, bringing together the parts of myself I had kept separate for too long. And as I stood in my restaurant, my son's hand in mine, I felt a deep sense of peace. I had never needed Alexis's approval or recognition. I had never needed to prove myself to her. My worth as a chef, as a mother, as a woman, wasn't dependent on her validation or anyone else's. Sometimes the most powerful statement isn't a grand revelation or a dramatic confrontation. Sometimes it's simply continuing to excel at what you love, quietly and with dignity, until the truth becomes impossible to ignore. In the weeks following the engagement party revelation, my relationship with Michael strengthened in ways I hadn't anticipated. He began stopping by the Blackbird during prep hours, sitting at the counter in my kitchen, watching me work with newfound appreciation. Sometimes he'd ask questions about techniques, about the business side of running a restaurant, about the years I'd spent building my reputation while keeping it separate from my identity as his mother. "I still can't believe you kept this from me all these years," he said one afternoon as he watched me taste test a new spring pea soup. "Didn't you ever want to tell me? To show me this part of your life?" I considered his question carefully as I adjusted the seasoning. "It wasn't about keeping secrets, not really. After your father died, I needed something that was just mine. a space where I wasn't defined by being someone's wife or someone's mother. I handed him a spoon. What? Do you think? Too much mint? He tasted the soup and shook his head. It's perfect. And I understand needing your own space. I just wish I'd known how talented you are. All those years I bragged about eating at the Blackbird, and I had no idea I was bragging about my own mother. I smiled, remembering how he'd once brought business clients here, proudly pointing out his connection to the renowned Chef Caroline, never knowing that connection was far more direct than he imagined. What matters is that you know now, I said, squeezing his hand, and that you're here, seeing this part of me. What I didn't ask about, what hung between us in careful silence, was Alexis. Since the night of the engagement party, she had been noticeably absent from our conversations. No more Sunday dinners, no more disparaging comments about my traditional cooking. It seemed the revelation that I was Chef Caroline had created a distance that neither Michael nor I was quite ready to address. Until one evening in late April, when I answered my doorbell to find Alexis standing on my porch. She looked different, more subdued, her usual impeccable appearance slightly softened. No designer handbag, no statement jewelry, just a simple sweater and jeans. "Caroline," she said, her voice lacking its usual polished confidence. "May I come in?" I stepped aside to welcome her, my curiosity outweighing any lingering resentment. We settled in my living room, the same space where she had first assessed my quaint home with barely disguised condescension. "I owe you an apology," she began without preamble. "I've spent weeks thinking about how to do this, what to say. But it comes down to this. I was wrong. I was judgmental and pretentious, and I dismissed you without taking the time to really see you." Her directness surprised me. I had expected excuses, justifications, perhaps even a subtle shifting of blame. Instead, she was offering a clear acknowledgement of her behavior. "Thank you for saying that," I replied. "It takes courage to admit when we've been wrong." She nodded, looking down at her hands. "The thing is, I've been thinking about why I acted that way. Not to excuse it, but to understand it. And I realized something about myself that isn't very flattering." She took a deep breath. "I've spent most of my life trying to prove that I belong in circles I wasn't born into. My family was working class. My dad was a plumber. My mom a school cafeteria worker. I worked my way through college and business school on scholarships and student loans. This was not what I had expected. In all our interactions, Alexis had presented herself as someone to the manner born, comfortable in exclusive spaces, knowledgeable about luxury and privilege, as if they were her birthright. "All that talk about Michelin-starred restaurants and cooking classes in France?" she continued. "It was partly true. I have experienced those things. But they weren't part of my upbringing. They were things I deliberately sought out once I started. Climbing the corporate ladder, trying to fit in with clients and colleagues who came from money. I thought about the way she had dismissed my home cooking, the way she had clung to the status associated with dining at the Blackbird. It made more sense now, not as simple snobbery, but as the defensive posturing of someone afraid of being found out, of being seen as not belonging. "The irony," she said with a sad smile, "is that my mom's cooking was a lot like yours. Sunday pot roasts, homemade bread, apple pies cooling on the windowsill. I grew up on that food. I loved that food. But somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that rejecting it was part of becoming someone else, someone more sophisticated, more worthy of success." I felt an unexpected softening toward her. "We often have complicated relationships with the things that remind us of where we came from," I observed, "especially when we're still figuring out who we want to be." "The night of the engagement party," Alexis said, "when I realized who you were, what you had accomplished while I was dismissing you as just a home cook, I felt ashamed. Not just because I'd been rude to you, but because I saw myself clearly for the first time in years. I saw how hollow all my pretensions were, how I'd been so busy trying to impress people that I'd lost sight of what actually matters. I could hear the genuine regret in her voice, see the vulnerability she was offering in place of her usual polished facade. It would have been easy to sit in judgment, to hold her past behavior against her. But I thought of all the ways I too had compartmentalized my life, creating separations and boundaries out of my own fears and needs. We all make mistakes, Alexis, I said gently. What matters is that we learn from them. She looked up, relief evident in her eyes. I've been talking to Michael a lot these past few weeks, about authenticity, about the kind of life we want to build together, about the kind of person I want to be going forward. She hesitated. I'd like the chance to start over with you, Caroline, to get to know the real you, both Chef Caroline and Michael's mom, and to let you get to know the real me, not the persona I've been hiding behind. It was a generous offer, this vulnerability, and I found myself wanting to meet it with equal openness. I'd like that, I told her. Perhaps we could start with a cooking lesson, something simple, from scratch, the kind of food that feeds more than just the body. Her smile was genuine, perhaps the first truly unguarded expression I'd seen from her. I'd like that very much. The following Sunday, I welcomed both Michael and Alexis into my kitchen. Not for a formal dinner at my dining table, but for a hands-on lesson in pasta making. The kind of tactile, messy, joyful cooking that can't be rushed or faked. I showed them how to create a well of flour on the countertop, how to crack eggs. Into the center, how to gradually incorporate the flour until a dough formed. Alexis, her sleeves rolled up, hands covered in flour, laughed as she struggled to master the technique. It feels alive, she said, kneading the elastic dough. Like, it has a personality. It does, I agreed. Dough responds to your touch, to the warmth of your hands, to the energy you bring to it. That's why the same recipe can turn out differently depending on who makes it. Michael watched us with a soft smile, clearly pleased to see this new dynamic emerging between the two women in his life. As we worked, rolling the pasta into thin sheets, cutting it into fettuccine, preparing a simple sauce of fresh tomatoes and basil, the conversation flowed naturally. Alexis spoke about her childhood in a small Pennsylvania town, about her grandmother who had taught her to bake blueberry muffins, about the financial struggles her family had faced. My parents were so proud when I got into Harvard, she said, as she stirred the sauce. But they couldn't afford to visit more than once in 4 years. I think that's when I started to feel like I was living in two separate worlds, never quite belonging in either. I understood that feeling all too well, though my own experience had been different. After the restaurant started getting recognition, I told her, I worried that if people knew Chef Caroline was just a suburban widow, they might not take my cooking seriously. So I kept the worlds separate. But in doing so, I missed the chance to fully integrate all parts of myself. You two are more alike than you realize, Michael observed, setting the table for our homemade meal. Both successful women who've compartmentalized their lives. Both afraid, in different ways, of being fully seen. He was right, of course. Despite our different backgrounds and journeys, Alexis and I shared a common struggle. The challenge of authenticity in a world that encourages us to present curated versions of ourselves. As we sat down to enjoy the pasta we had made together, I felt a sense of harmony that had been missing from our previous dinners. This wasn't about impressing anyone or maintaining appearances. It was about sharing food made with care, about nourishing connections that went beyond surface impressions. This is delicious, Alexis said, twirling fettuccine around her fork. And somehow, it tastes better knowing we made it ourselves. That's the secret ingredient, I told her. The satisfaction of creation. It's why I've never tired of cooking. Even after all these years, each dish is an opportunity to create something meaningful, something that brings people together. Michael raised his glass in a toast. To new beginnings, he said, and to being our authentic selves. We clinked glasses, and I felt something shift and settle into place, not just in my relationship with Alexis, but in my own sense of wholeness. For the first time in years, I wasn't compartmentalizing my identities as mother and chef. I was simply Caroline in all my complexity. The following weeks brought a gradual but profound change in my relationship with Alexis. The cooking lesson became a regular Sunday tradition, each week focusing on a different technique or cuisine. She proved to be an eager and intuitive student, approaching each lesson with genuine curiosity rather than the performative appreciation she had once affected. One Sunday, as we prepared a bouillabaisse using techniques I had learned during a summer in Marseille, Alexis broached a subject that had been quietly evolving between her and Michael. "We've been reconsidering our wedding plans," she said, carefully deveining a shrimp. "All those grand ideas I had, the 5-star hotel ballroom, the celebrity DJ, the designer everything, they don't feel right anymore." I kept my expression neutral, not wanting to influence her thinking. "Oh? What are you considering instead?" She looked up, a slight flush coloring her cheeks. "Actually, we were wondering if it might be possible to have the reception at the Blackbird. Not as clients booking a venue, but as families celebrating together in a place that means something to all of us." The request touched me deeply. "I'd be honored," I said. "The restaurant has always been an extension of my home kitchen, a place to feed people I care about, to create experiences that become memories." "That's exactly why it feels right," she said. "And there's something else we wanted to ask." She hesitated, exchanging a glance with Michael. "Would you consider catering the wedding as yourself? As Caroline, not as Chef Caroline? Not fancy restaurant food, but the kind of cooking you do at home, the dishes that Michael grew up with, that represent your family traditions?" I was stunned by the request, not just because it represented such a reversal from Alexis's previous dismissal of my home cooking, but because it suggested a genuine appreciation for the emotional significance of food prepared with love. "You want me to cook for your wedding as Michael's mom, not as a professional chef?" I asked, wanting to be sure I understood. "Exactly," Michael confirmed, joining our conversation. "The food at the Blackbird is amazing, Mom. Everyone knows that. But the food you make at home, the dishes that have been part of our family for generations, that's what would make our wedding special." I felt a surge of emotion, unexpected tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. For years, I had kept my identity separate, afraid that one might diminish the other. Now my son and his fiancée were asking me to bring them together, to cook not with the technical precision of Chef Caroline, but with the heart and history of Caroline Weber, mother and keeper of family traditions. "I would be deeply honored," I said, my voice thick with feeling. Alexis reached over and squeezed my hand, her own eyes suspiciously bright. "We want our wedding to be authentic, Caroline. No more pretending to be something we're not. No more chasing others' approval. Just us, celebrating with the people we love, sharing food that means something." In that moment, standing in my kitchen with flour on my apron and tears in my eyes, I felt a sense of wholeness that had eluded me for years. The carefully maintained boundaries between my identities as mother and chef, as Caroline and Chef Caroline, were dissolving. Not because they had been forcibly removed, but because they were no longer needed. The wedding planning proceeded with a spirit of collaboration and authenticity that transformed what could have been a stressful process into a joyful one. Alexis, liberated from her self-imposed pressure to impress, revealed herself to be thoughtful and creative, more interested in meaning than in status. Together, we designed a menu that honored both families' traditions, my husband's German heritage, my New England roots, and touches from Alexis's Pennsylvania Dutch background. One afternoon, as we tested recipes in the Blackbird's kitchen, during off hours, Alexis's mother, Patricia, joined us. I had been apprehensive about meeting her, given Alexis's description of her complicated relationship with her past. But Patricia proved to be a warm, unpretentious woman who clearly adored her daughter. "I can't believe I'm cooking alongside Chef Caroline," she whispered to me as we rolled out dough for pierogies, a dish from her Polish grandmother that Alexis had requested for the wedding menu. "My coworkers at the school cafeteria are never going to believe this." "Just Caroline, please," I insisted, showing her how to crimp the edges of the dumplings. "And I'm learning as much from you as you are from me. These pierogies are going to be the highlight of the appetizer course." Patricia beamed with pride. "Alexis used to be embarrassed by my cooking," she confided. "When she started climbing the corporate ladder, she'd ask me not to pack leftovers for her to take home. Said the smell of cabbage and onions wasn't appropriate for the office." She shook her head. "But lately, she's been asking for recipes, calling for cooking advice. It's like I have my daughter back." I glanced across the kitchen, where Alexis and Michael were taste testing different versions of my signature herb vinaigrette, their heads bent together in concentration. "I think she's finding her way back to herself," I observed. "Sometimes, we have to wander far from home before we realize what we've left behind." "She told me what happened," Patricia said quietly. "How she put on airs about food, how she dismissed your cooking only to discover you were the chef she'd been praising all along." She looked at me with genuine respect. "That could have been the end of your relationship with her. Most people wouldn't have been so forgiving." I considered her words as I shaped another pierogi. "I've lived long enough to know that most of us are just doing our best with the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and who we need to be." Alexis was trying to belong in a world she thought required her to reject her origins. I understand that impulse. I felt it myself. "Still," Patricia insisted, "you showed real grace, and look what's come of it." She nodded toward Alexis and Michael, who were now laughing as they fed each other spoonfuls of something that had clearly turned out well. "She's happier than I've seen her in years, more herself." As if sensing our attention, Alexis looked up and caught my eye, offering a warm smile that reflected none of the guarded calculation I had once seen in her expression. In that moment, I realized that the journey we had been through, painful as parts of it had been, had given both of us a gift. The freedom to be authentically ourselves, without fear of judgment or rejection. The morning of the wedding dawned, with the kind of gentle spring sunshine that photographers dream of, warm but not harsh, casting a golden glow over the Blackbird's garden, where the ceremony would take place. I had been up since 4, overseeing the final preparations for the celebration meal that would follow. My kitchen staff, accustomed to executing my precise instructions for regular service, were both amused and touched by my personal involvement in this particular menu. They had never seen Chef Caroline so emotionally invested in a meal, so intent on perfecting dishes that wouldn't have seemed out of place at a family Sunday dinner. "The cocoa van needs another 15 minutes, I instructed Elena, my sous chef. "And make sure the potatoes are creamy but still have some texture, exactly the way Michael likes them." Elena smiled knowingly. "Yes, chef. Or should I say, yes, mom?" I laughed, appreciating her gentle teasing. Today, they're one and the same. As the hour of the ceremony approached, I changed from my chef's whites into the sage green dress Alexis had helped me select, a simple but elegant design that complemented the garden setting. For the first time in years, I would be attending a function at my restaurant not as Chef Caroline but as mother of the groom. The ceremony was everything a wedding should be: intimate, genuine, focused on the commitment between two people who had found their way to each other through complications and misunderstandings to arrive at a place of mutual respect and love. I watched with pride as Michael, handsome in his tailored suit, recited vows he had written himself. And I felt a surprising surge of maternal affection for Alexis as she promised to create a life with my son based on honesty, respect, and authentic love. When they were pronounced husband and wife, the small gathering of family and close friends erupted in applause. I found myself wiping away tears, not just for the beauty of the moment, but for the journey that had brought us all to this garden, to this celebration, to this newfound understanding of what it means to truly see and accept one another. The reception that followed was unlike any event the Blackbird had ever hosted. The formal dining room had been transformed with wildflowers and vintage linens, creating a space that felt both elegant and homey. The menu, a collaboration between myself, Alexis, and Patricia, told the story of our blended families through food: my husband's sauerbraten alongside Patricia's pierogies, my New England clam chowder next to Pennsylvania Dutch apple dumplings, and modernized versions of dishes Michael had grown up eating at our family table. As the first course was served, James, my longtime front-of-house manager, clinked a glass for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, before you enjoy this very special meal, Chef Caroline, or as the groom knows her mom, would like to say a few words." I stood, feeling a momentary flutter of nervousness. In my restaurant, I was accustomed to letting my food speak for me, to remaining behind the scenes while others enjoyed the experiences I created. But today was different. Today called for spoken words, for an acknowledgement of the journey we had shared. "Food has always been my language of love," I began, looking around at the faces of family and friends gathered at the long tables. "When words fail, a carefully prepared meal can say everything that matters. I see you. I care for you. I want to nourish your body and spirit." My gaze found Michael and Alexis, seated together at the center of the main table, their faces glowing with happiness. Michael grew up in my kitchen, learning to taste, to appreciate, to connect food with love and care. And now Alexis has joined that tradition, bringing her own family's food stories into our shared history. I raised my glass. Today's meal is not about impressive techniques or culinary trends. It's about generations of care, translated through recipes passed down, adapted, and made new again. It's about the pierogies Patricia's grandmother taught her to make, the sauerbraten that reminds us of Michael's father, the clam chowder my mother made on cold New England evenings. I felt a swelling of emotion, a profound gratitude for the complicated, imperfect journey that had brought us to this moment of connection and understanding. In my restaurant, I'm known as Chef Caroline, creator of carefully constructed dining experiences. But today, I cook as Caroline Weber, mother and now mother-in-law, offering not just food, but a legacy of love that I hope will nourish your marriage for many years to come. As I concluded my toast, I saw tears in Alexis's eyes, not the careful, measured emotion she might once have permitted herself to display, but genuine, unguarded feeling. She rose from her seat and came to embrace me, whispering in my ear, "Thank you for seeing the real me, even when I was trying so hard to be someone else." I held her close. This woman who had once dismissed my cooking as making her feel sick, who had now become not just my son's wife, but a person I genuinely cared for and respected. "Thank you for allowing yourself to be seen," I replied softly. As we returned to our seats and the meal continued, I looked around the room at the joyful faces of our guests enjoying the food we had prepared together. The boundaries that had once seemed so necessary, between professional and personal, between Chef Caroline and just Caroline, felt not just permeable, but irrelevant. I was whole, integrated, fully myself in a way I hadn't been in years. The revelation of my identity as Chef Caroline, which might have been a moment of triumph or vindication, had instead become a catalyst for genuine connection. What mattered wasn't that I had proven Alexis wrong or exposed her pretensions. What mattered was that through our conflict and reconciliation, we had both found the courage to step out from behind our carefully constructed facades and meet each other as our authentic selves. In that garden, surrounded by the people I loved, sharing food that told our collective story, I understood that the greatest achievement of my career wasn't the Michelin star or the glowing reviews or even the successful business I had built. It was this: the ability to use food as a bridge between hearts, as a vehicle for understanding, as a tangible expression of love that transcended words. As the evening progressed, I moved between my roles with fluid ease, checking on the kitchen, joining conversations at various tables, sharing stories with new relatives, embracing old friends, no longer compartmentalized, no longer afraid that one aspect of my identity might diminish another. Just Caroline, in all my complexity and wholeness. Later, as twilight settled over the garden and the celebration continued with music and dancing, I found a quiet moment to step back and observe the scene. Michael and Alexis swayed together on the small dance floor, lost in each other's eyes. Patricia chatted animatedly with James about the intricacies of restaurant management. My kitchen, staff released from their duties, mingled with the guests, accepting compliments on the meal we had created together. In that moment of reflection, I thought about the long journey that had brought me here. From young wife and mother, to widow finding her way forward, to acclaimed chef creating a separate identity, to this integrated self who could embrace all aspects of who I was without fear or apology. I thought about how Alexis's dismissal of my cooking, that casual, cutting comment about feeling sick from my traditional food, had initially wounded me, but had ultimately led to this moment of genuine connection and mutual respect. How what might have become a story of resentment and retaliation had instead become one of growth and reconciliation. The wedding day itself passed like a beautiful dream, a celebration not just of Michael and Alexis's love, but of the genuine connections we had all forged through our journey of misunderstandings and revelations. As mother of the groom and secret chef extraordinaire, I moved seamlessly between roles, checking on the kitchen one moment and wiping away sentimental tears the next. The morning after the wedding, I invited the newlyweds and Alexis's parents to a farewell brunch in my garden before they departed for their honeymoon in Provence. It was a simple affair: fresh croissants, a frittata with herbs from my garden, summer berries with homemade yogurt. No pretension, no performance, just good food shared among family. As we lingered over coffee, Patricia, Alexis's mother, leaned toward me with a conspiratorial smile. "I've been thinking," she said, "about starting a small catering business. Back home. Nothing fancy, just honest, good food for community events. Do you think I'm too old to try something new?" I laughed, thinking about how I'd reinvented myself in my 40s after David died. "You're never too old to pursue a passion," I assured her, "and food brings people together in ways nothing else can." "That's what I've always thought," she agreed. "Watching you these past months, how you've built this incredible business while staying true to what you love, it's inspired me to stop putting my dreams on hold." The genuine admiration in her voice touched me. So much had changed since that first dinner when Alexis had claimed my cooking made her feel ill. Now her mother was looking to me for mentorship, for permission to pursue her own culinary ambitions. "I'll help however I can," I promised, already mentally compiling resources and contacts that might be useful for her. Across the table, Michael and Alexis were deep in conversation with Robert, Alexis's father, who was describing the vegetable garden he had maintained for decades. "The secret to sweet tomatoes," he was saying, "is in the soil preparation months before planting." I marveled at how far we had all come, from pretension and compartmentalized identities to this genuine exchange of knowledge and passions. The journey hadn't been easy, but the destination was worth every difficult step. After Michael and Alexis departed for their honeymoon, I threw myself back into work at the Blackbird. Summer was our busiest season, with the garden patio full every night and a new seasonal menu that celebrated the abundant local produce. But something had shifted in my approach to my dual roles. No longer did I feel the need to keep Chef Caroline entirely separate from Caroline Weber, mother and widow. I began inviting friends from my personal life to experience the restaurant, proudly showing them the kitchen that had been my sanctuary and creative outlet for decades. I spoke more openly with my staff about my family, sharing stories and photographs that had previously been kept private. James, my front-of-house manager and friend of 20 years, noticed the change immediately. "You seem lighter," he observed one evening after closing. "More integrated somehow." "I feel it," I admitted, as we shared a glass of wine in the empty dining room. For so long, I kept these parts of myself separate because I thought they had to be. I thought being someone's mother somehow diminished being a chef, and vice versa. But now I see that each role enriches the other. "It suits you," he said simply. "This wholeness." The revelation that had begun with Alexis's dismissal of my cooking, that painful moment of being unseen and underestimated, had ultimately led to a liberation I hadn't known I needed. By breaking down the walls between my identities, I had discovered a more authentic way of being in the world. 3 weeks after the wedding, I received a postcard from Provence. On the front was a charming image of a local market, overflowing with summer produce. On the back, in Alexis's precise handwriting, "Taking a cooking class from a local grandmother who reminds me of you. Unpretentious, skilled, sharing centuries of wisdom through food. Learning to make the kind of simple dishes that actually require deep knowledge and care. Missing your Sunday cooking lessons. With love and gratitude, Alexis." I pinned the postcard to the bulletin board in my home kitchen, touched by the evolution in our relationship. From critic to student, from judgment to appreciation. It wasn't just Alexis who had changed, though. I, too, had grown, learning to embrace all aspects of myself without fear that one would diminish the other. When Michael and Alexis returned from their honeymoon, tanned and relaxed and full of stories about the markets and cafes of Provence, our Sunday cooking lessons resumed with renewed enthusiasm. But now they had a specific purpose. Alexis wanted to learn to cook the dishes her mother and grandmother had made, the comfort food of her childhood that she had once rejected in her quest for sophistication. "I spent years trying to distance myself from where I came from," she admitted as we prepared a traditional Pennsylvania Dutch chicken pot pie, which, I learned, was actually more of a hearty stew with square noodles than what most people think of as a pie. Now, I want to reclaim those connections, to honor that heritage. I understood her impulse all too well. "Food is memory," I said, showing her how to roll out the dough for the noodles to just the right thickness. "When we cook the dishes our families have made for generations, we're not just feeding our bodies, we're keeping stories alive." Alexis nodded thoughtfully. "My grandmother would say that she could taste love in food. I used to think that was just sentimentality, but now, I understand what she meant. There's something that goes beyond ingredients and technique. Something you can't learn in a fancy cooking class. Presence," I suggested. "Being fully engaged with what you're creating, with who you're creating it for. That's the secret ingredient no recipe can list." Our Sunday cooking sessions became a cherished tradition, expanding to include others. Michael, of course, but also friends from both our lives. Occasionally Patricia and Robert when they visited from Pennsylvania. Sometimes even members of my restaurant staff who were curious about the homestyle dishes that influenced my professional creations. My kitchen, once just the place where I prepared meals for my family, became a hub of community and learning. The boundary between my professional and personal spaces, like the boundary between my identities, had softened into something more fluid and natural. One Sunday afternoon in late October, as we prepared a feast celebrating the autumn harvest, Alexis approached me with an unexpected question. "Caroline," she said hesitantly, "I've been thinking about making a career change." I looked up from the butternut squash I was dicing. "Oh, what are you considering?" She took a deep breath. "I want to work with food, not as a chef. I know I don't have the training or experience for that, but maybe in food writing or marketing." for small, authentic food businesses, something that combines my business background with this new passion. I was touched by her vulnerability in sharing this aspiration. I think that sounds wonderful, Alexis. You have a genuine appreciation for the stories behind food, the cultural significance of different cuisines. That perspective is valuable. Do you really think so? She looked uncertain, a far cry from the confident marketing executive who had first entered my home with designer handbag and practiced smile. It would mean walking away from a successful career, starting over in many ways. Sometimes starting over is exactly what we need, I said, thinking of my own journey after David's death, how rebuilding the Blackbird had given me purpose and joy during that difficult time. And you wouldn't be starting from nothing. You'd be bringing all your experience and skills to a new context. She nodded slowly. I've already started a food blog. Just a small thing, documenting our cooking lessons, exploring the connections between food and identity, memory, belonging. It's been surprisingly fulfilling. I'd love to read it, I told her sincerely. Actually, she said, reaching for her phone, I've been meaning to show you. It's called Coming Home Through Food. The tagline is Reconnecting with My Roots, one recipe at a time. She pulled up the website, and I was immediately impressed by its professional design and thoughtful content. The latest entry was titled, The Dish That Changed Everything, and with a jolt, I realized it was about my coq au vin, the meal I had prepared the first time she visited my home, the one she had dismissed as making her feel sick, only to later praise the identical dish at the Blackbird. I began reading, moved by her honest recounting of that evening, her admission of pretension, her subsequent discovery of my true identity. Far from glossing over her behavior, she examined it with unflinching self-awareness, using it as a springboard to explore broader themes of authenticity, judgment, and the social performance that often surrounds food and dining. Alexis, I said when I finished reading, this is remarkable. Not just well-written, but genuinely insightful. You have a gift for connecting food to deeper emotional and cultural currents. Her face lit up with pleasure. Really? That means so much coming from you. Have you shown this to Michael? She nodded. He's been incredibly supportive, said it's the most authentic thing I've ever done. I smiled, recognizing the truth in his assessment. He's right. This work has your heart in it. I'm thinking of approaching some small food businesses about consulting work, she continued, encouraged by my response, helping them tell their stories, connect with customers who value authenticity over trendiness. Do you think that's viable? Not only viable, but necessary, I assured her. In a world of Instagram food trends and viral recipes, businesses with genuine stories and traditions need help cutting through the noise. As we returned to our cooking, I felt a deep satisfaction in witnessing Alexis's evolution. The woman who had once used food as a status symbol, who had dismissed tradition in favor of trendy culinary performances, was now using her considerable talents to celebrate authenticity and heritage. Like me, she was finding a way to integrate different aspects of herself, her business acumen, her working-class roots, her newfound appreciation for culinary traditions. Over the following months, Alexis's blog gained a modest but dedicated following. Her thoughtful explorations of food, memory, and identity resonated with readers tired of picture-perfect, content-free food content. She began receiving inquiries from small artisanal food producers interested in her marketing services, and gradually she transitioned from her corporate role to freelance consulting work focused exclusively on food businesses. One particularly satisfying development was her partnership with Patricia, who had indeed started a small catering company specializing in Pennsylvania Dutch cuisine. Alexis helped her mother create branding that honored the tradition and craftsmanship behind the food, positioning it not as quaint or old-fashioned, but as authentic and deeply rooted. Their mother-daughter collaboration was healing for both of them. Patricia finally receiving recognition for her culinary skills, Alexis embracing the heritage she had once rejected. My own relationship with Alexis continued to deepen through our shared love of food and cooking. What had begun as formal cooking lessons evolved into collaborative exploration, with each of us bringing recipes and techniques to share. I taught her the professional skills I had honed over decades. She introduced me to her family's traditional dishes and inspired me with her fresh perspective. The unexpected outcome of our journey, from that initial dinner where she claimed my cooking, made her feel sick to our current partnership in the kitchen, wasn't just a healed relationship. It was a mutual enrichment, a recognition that we each had something valuable to offer the other. This truth was brought home to me one evening in December, about 6 months after the wedding. I had invited Michael and Alexis to the Blackbird for a special dinner, the unveiling of our winter menu, which for the first time included a dish directly inspired by our Sunday cooking sessions. A refined version of Patricia's Pennsylvania Dutch chicken pot pie, reimagined with local heritage chicken, house-made root vegetable stock, and hand-cut square noodles that honored the traditional preparation while elevating it through technique and presentation. When the dish was served to their table, I emerged from the kitchen to gauge their reaction. Alexis looked up, her eyes wide with surprise and emotion. "You put my mom's dish on your menu," she said, her voice catching. I nodded. "With some refinements, but yes, the heart of it is her recipe, the one you taught me." I thought it was time the Blackbird's menu reflected the full range of my influences, not just my professional training, but the traditions shared with me by family, including my new family. Michael reached for my hand, squeezing it in silent gratitude. Alexis, momentarily speechless, simply rose from her seat and embraced me. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing value in where I come from, in who I really am." "Thank you," I replied, "for helping me see that I don't have to choose between being Chef Caroline and being Michael's mom. I can be all of who I am, without compartments or divisions." That evening marked a crystallization of the lessons we had all learned through our complicated journey together. Food wasn't just sustenance or status symbol or cultural artifact, though it could be all those things. At its heart, food was connection, to our histories, to our communities, to each other. The dish became one of the most popular items on the Blackbird's winter menu, drawing praise from critics and patrons alike. One review particularly touched me. Chef Caroline Weber continues to evolve, surprising her dedicated following with a Pennsylvania Dutch-inspired creation that somehow manages to be both rustic and refined, traditional and innovative. The dish speaks to her growing interest in American regional cuisines and her gift for honoring tradition while gently elevating it through technique. What the reviewer couldn't know was that the dish represented far more than a culinary exploration. It was a tangible symbol of reconciliation, of mutual respect, of the beauty that can emerge when we drop our pretensions and truly see one another. As winter deepened into January, bringing short days and long nights perfect for cooking hearty meals, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had begun with that painful first dinner. How Alexis's dismissal of my cooking had ultimately led to a deeper understanding between us. How her pretensions had given way to authentic connection. How my own carefully maintained boundaries between personal and professional had dissolved into a more integrated sense of self. One snowy Sunday, as we gathered in my kitchen for our weekly cooking session, Michael chopping vegetables, Alexis kneading bread dough, me supervising them both, I marveled at the family we had become. Not perfect, certainly, still capable of misunderstandings and missteps, but fundamentally respectful of each other's journeys, genuinely interested in each other's passions. "What are you smiling about, Mom?" Michael asked, noticing my expression. "Just thinking about how far we've all come," I replied. "About how sometimes the most difficult beginnings can lead to the most beautiful outcomes." Alexis looked up from her bread dough, flour dusting her cheeks. "I think about that first dinner a lot," she admitted. "How close I came to missing out on all of this because I was so wrapped up in appearances, in trying to impress." "We all have our defenses," I observed. "Ways we try to protect ourselves from feeling vulnerable or inadequate. The miracle isn't that we start out perfect. It's that we find the courage to grow, to change, to see ourselves and each other more clearly." Michael set down his knife and came to stand beside me, putting an arm around my shoulders. "I'm just grateful that my two favorite women found a way to move past that rocky start," he said. "Though I still can't believe I didn't figure out you were Chef Caroline long before the big reveal. All those times I bragged about eating at the Blackbird, and you just smiled and nodded." I laughed. To be fair, I worked very hard to keep those worlds separate, until I didn't need to anymore. After lunch, as Michael helped with the dishes, Alexis drew me aside. "I've been meaning to share something with you," she said, a hint of nervous excitement in her voice. "I've been approached by a publisher. They want me to write a food memoir, about my journey from food snob to food lover, about reconnecting with my roots, about how cooking with you changed my relationship with food and identity." "Alexis, that's wonderful," I exclaimed. "Your blog posts are already so insightful. A full book would be a gift to readers." She bit her lip. "There's one thing, though. The story really begins with that first dinner at your house, with my behavior, my dismissal of your cooking. I want to tell the truth about that moment, about how wrong I was, but I don't want to make you uncomfortable." I considered her concern. Once, the idea of having that painful evening immortalized in print might have disturbed me. But now, understanding the transformative power of that experience for both of us, I felt differently. "Tell the truth," I encouraged her. "The whole story, including my own journey from compartmentalizing my identities to embracing all aspects of who I am. If our experience can help others reflect on the masks they wear, the judgments they make, the ways they separate parts of themselves that belong together, then it's worth any momentary discomfort." Relief and gratitude washed over her face. "I was hoping you'd say that, because I truly believe our story might help others who struggle with authenticity, with belonging, with reconciling different parts of their lives. Besides," I added with a smile, "there's a certain poetic justice in the world knowing that the sophisticated food critic who claimed my cooking made her feel sick was unwittingly criticizing the chef she most admired." Alexis laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Talk about eating crow. Though in my defense, your coq au vin really does taste better at the Blackbird than it did that first night at your house." I raised an eyebrow. "The recipe is identical, but the context was different," she countered. "At the Blackbird, I was open to being impressed. In your home, I was determined to find fault. It's amazing how our expectations shape our experiences." Her insight struck me as profound. How much of what we taste, in food and in life, is influenced by what we expect to taste? How often do we miss the beauty and value right in front of us because we're looking for something else entirely? As winter gradually yielded to spring, Alexis began work on her memoir, often stopping by to discuss chapters or to clarify details about our shared history. Her writing process became another form of connection between us, another opportunity to reflect on the journey we had taken from antagonism to appreciation, from judgment to genuine understanding. One evening in early April, she brought a draft of the first chapter to my home. We sat together in the living room, the same space where she had once assessed my quaint decor with barely concealed disdain, now a place of comfort and honest conversation. "I'd like you to read it," she said, handing me a manila folder. "Be brutal. I want this to be honest, not self-serving." I took the folder, touched by her trust. "I'll read it tonight and give you my thoughts." After she left, I settled into my favorite armchair with a cup of tea and began reading. The chapter opened with a vivid description of that first dinner in my home. The details sharply observed, the emotions nakedly honest. Alexis spared herself nothing in the retelling, capturing her pretensions and judgments with unflinching clarity. What struck me most was her description of me, not just my cooking, but my presence, my dignified response to her rudeness. She had seen more than I realized in that first encounter, noting the precision of my knife skills, the confidence of my movements in the kitchen, the depth of knowledge evident in my casual remarks about technique and flavor. Even as she had dismissed me as a simple home cook, part of her had recognized the mastery underlying my apparent ordinariness. The chapter concluded with a reflection that brought tears to my eyes. In my determination to be someone impressive, I nearly missed the opportunity to know someone truly extraordinary, not just an acclaimed chef, though she was certainly that, but a woman who had built a life of purpose and passion without needing to announce her accomplishments to the world. Who taught me, through her quiet example, that true sophistication lies not in appearances or accolades, but in authenticity, generosity, and grace under pressure. I sat for a long time after finishing the chapter, reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought us from that difficult first dinner to this moment of mutual appreciation and respect. How a painful beginning had ultimately led to a beautiful, if unexpected, connection. How being misunderstood, underestimated, even insulted had opened a door to deeper understanding and integration, not just between Alexis and me, but within myself. The following Sunday, as we prepared a spring meal celebrating the season's first asparagus, I shared my thoughts on her writing. It's beautiful, Alexis. Honest without being cruel to yourself. Insightful without being preachy. I think it will resonate with many readers. She looked up from the hollandaise sauce she was whisking, relief evident in her expression. Really? You're not just saying that? When have you known me to say things just to be nice? I teased. The chapter captures what I've come to admire most about you. Your courage in facing uncomfortable truths, your willingness to grow from them. She blushed slightly at the praise. I've had a good example, she said quietly. Watching you integrate all aspects of yourself, mother, chef, mentor, friend, without diminishing any of them. It's changed how I think about my own life, about what success and fulfillment really mean. Michael, overhearing our conversation as he set the table, added his perspective. You've both changed, he observed. Mom, you're more open, more willing to let people see all sides of who you are. And Alexis, you're more authentic, more comfortable in your own skin. He was right, of course. The journey that had begun with Alexis's dismissal of my cooking had transformed us both. Not in spite of its difficult beginning, but because of it. The very pain of being misunderstood, of having my cooking declared sickening by someone who praised the identical food in another context, had ultimately led to a liberation I might never have otherwise experienced. As we sat down to our meal, sunshine streaming through the kitchen windows, highlighting the simple beauty of asparagus dressed with lemon and butter, I felt a profound gratitude for the complicated, imperfect path that had brought us to this moment of connection and understanding. How strange and wonderful that sometimes our greatest growth emerges from our most painful experiences. How miraculous that what begins in misunderstanding can evolve into deep appreciation. As spring blossomed into summer, Alexis's memoir project gained momentum. Her publisher was enthusiastic about the early chapters, particularly the compelling narrative of transformation that began with her dismissal of my cooking and culminated in our eventual mutual understanding. What had started as a painful misunderstanding had become the foundation for a powerful story about authenticity, growth, and the unexpected ways we find connection. I found myself increasingly involved in her writing process, not just as a subject, but as a collaborator of sorts. We would sit for hours in my garden, Alexis recording my memories of building the Blackbird, of navigating the male-dominated culinary world of the 1990s, of finding my voice as a chef while maintaining my privacy as a person. "What I still don't understand," she said one afternoon as we shelled fresh peas for dinner, "is why you never took public credit for your success. Most chefs would have been on every cooking show, published cookbooks, built a personal brand. You could have been famous." I considered her question, rolling a pea pod between my fingers. "Fame was never my goal," I said finally. "For me, cooking has always been about creating experiences for others, not about receiving recognition for myself. The food was what mattered, not who made it." "But didn't you ever want acknowledgement, especially when critics were raving about the Blackbird's cuisine?" I smiled, remembering the quiet satisfaction I'd felt reading glowing reviews, knowing that the anonymous Chef Caroline the critics praised was me. I got the acknowledgement that mattered most, seeing diners enjoy my food, watching my restaurant succeed, building something meaningful and lasting. The public acclaim would have been nice, I suppose, but it came with a price I wasn't willing to pay. "What price?" Alexis asked. Her writer's curiosity piqued. Scrutiny, expectations, the pressure to become a personality rather than just a chef. I emptied the bowl of shelled peas into a colander. And honestly, after David died, I needed the separation between my personal and professional lives. Being just Michael's mom at home gave me space to grieve, to be imperfect, to exist without the pressure of being Chef Caroline. Alexis nodded, thoughtfully. "It's ironic. I spent years trying to be seen, to be recognized, to impress people with my sophistication. And you spent years avoiding that exact kind of attention. We all have different needs at different times in our lives," I observed. Neither approach was wrong, just right for who we were then. These conversations with Alexis were illuminating not just for her book, but for my own self-understanding. Articulating choices I had made intuitively over the years helped me recognize patterns and motivations I hadn't fully acknowledged before. In helping her tell her story, I was gaining new perspective on my own. Meanwhile, the Blackbird continued to thrive, but with subtle changes that reflected my own evolution. I began hosting special family table dinners once a month, intimate gatherings where I would emerge from the kitchen to share the stories behind each dish, explaining influences from my New England childhood, from David's German heritage, from travels and friendships and family traditions. These events quickly became our most sought-after reservation, with a waiting list extending months into the future. "People love connecting with you," James observed after one particularly successful evening. "They're not just coming for the food anymore, they're coming for your story, for the meaning behind each dish." "It turns out I don't mind being seen after all," I replied, surprising myself with the realization. At least, not when I'm being seen for who I truly am, not just as Chef Caroline or Michael's mom, but as all the complex, contradictory parts that make me whole. This integration of my identities extended beyond the Blackbird. I began teaching occasional cooking classes at the community center, simple, practical lessons designed for busy families or seniors living alone. I brought the technical precision I had honed at the Blackbird to these classes, but within a context that made fine cooking accessible to everyone. No pretension, no chefly intimidation, just the joy of creating good food with whatever time, budget, and skill level my students possessed. One Tuesday evening after such a class, an elderly gentleman approached me as I was packing up my supplies. "I lost my wife last year," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "Never cooked a day in my life before that. Your classes have been a lifeline, Mrs. Weber. Not just the cooking, but the way you help us see food as connection, as memory, as comfort." His words touched me deeply. All the accolades the Blackbird had received, the Michelin star, the glowing reviews, the industry, awards, somehow felt less significant than this simple acknowledgement from a widower learning to nourish himself in his grief. "Food is medicine for the soul," I told him, thinking of how cooking had sustained me after David's death. "Sometimes making a meal for yourself is the most profound act of self-care." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "My Elaine would have liked you. She believed in the healing power of a good meal too." As he walked away, I found myself reflecting on how my relationship with cooking had evolved over the decades. From the practical necessity of feeding a family, to the creative outlet of a professional kitchen, to this new dimension, food as healing, as connection, as vehicle for authentic self-expression. When I shared this encounter with Alexis during our next writing session, she immediately understood its significance. "That's what's been missing from my manuscript," she said, tapping her pen against her notebook. "The redemptive power of food, how it can heal divisions, bridge misunderstandings, create connections across differences." "It's certainly been that way for us," I agreed. "From that first disastrous dinner to where we are now, cooking side by side, sharing stories and techniques, finding common ground despite our different paths." Alexis laughed, shaking her head at the memory. "God, I was unbearable that night. All that nonsense about your cooking making me feel sick when it was actually my own insecurities making me ill." "We all wear masks sometimes," I said. "The miracle is finding people who see past them to who we really are, or who might become." This theme of seeing and being truly seen became central to Alexis's memoir. As summer waned into autumn, she completed a full draft, tentatively titled Homecoming, a journey from pretension to authenticity through food and family. She asked if I would read it in its entirety before she submitted it to her editor, a request that both honored and intimidated me. "Are you sure?" I asked. "It's your story to tell. I don't want to influence your voice or perspective." "You're central to the narrative," she insisted. "Not just as a character in my journey, but as a catalyst for my transformation. I want to make sure I've captured you truthfully, respectfully." So I spent a weekend immersed in her manuscript, marveling at her unflinching self-examination, her beautiful prose, her genuine insights about food, identity, and belonging. She had crafted a narrative that was honest without being cruel, reflective without being self-indulgent. Most importantly, she had captured the essence of our complicated relationship, how initial antagonism had eventually yielded to mutual respect and genuine affection. "It's extraordinary, Alexis," I told her when I finished reading. "You've turned a personal journey into something universal, about the masks we wear, the judgments we make, the courage it takes to be authentic in a world that often rewards performance over truth." She exhaled in relief. "And you feel I've portrayed you fairly?" That was my greatest concern. "More than fairly," I assured her. "You've seen me with clear eyes and an open heart. That's all any of us can ask." As autumn deepened, bringing cooler temperatures and the rich harvests of the season, another dimension of my evolving relationship with Alexis emerged. She approached me one Sunday after our cooking session, a hint of nervousness in her expression. "Caroline," she began hesitantly, "I've been thinking about what comes next, after the book is published, after this chapter of my life." I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel, giving her my full attention. "What are you considering?" "I want to open a cafe," she said in a rush, as if afraid she might lose her nerve. "Nothing fancy or pretentious. Just a small, welcoming place serving honest, skillfully prepared food with clear connections to culinary traditions." She took a deep breath. "And I was hoping you might consider being my mentor, not as a formal business partner, but as an advisor." The request took me by surprise. Alexis had embraced cooking with enthusiasm, certainly, but I hadn't realized her passion had grown to the point of wanting to make it her livelihood. "A cafe is a significant undertaking," I said carefully. The restaurant business is notoriously difficult, especially for newcomers. I know, she acknowledged. That's why I'm not diving in without guidance. I've spent the past few months researching, developing a business plan, even scouting potential locations. But what I really need is someone who understands both the business and the heart of creating food for others. Someone like you. I was touched by her trust in me, this woman who had once dismissed my cooking as making her feel sick. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. It would be a full circle moment, wouldn't it? She said with a small smile. From critic to student to colleague. Indeed, it would, I agreed. Tell me more about your vision for this cafe. Over. The next hour, Alexis shared her carefully considered plans. She envisioned a morning to afternoon establishment focused on breakfast and lunch, featuring dishes that honored culinary traditions from various cultures, Pennsylvania Dutch recipes from her childhood, New England classics from mine, international comfort foods discovered through research and travel. Each dish would come with a small story card explaining its origins and significance, inviting diners to connect with the cultural and historical dimensions of what they were eating. It's not just about feeding people, she explained, her eyes alight with passion. It's about using food as a vehicle for storytelling, for cultural appreciation, for community building. Taking what I've learned from you about the meaning behind dishes and making that accessible to everyone. As she spoke, I recognized how much she had grown from the status-conscious woman who had first entered my home. Her vision for the cafe reflected a genuine appreciation for tradition, authenticity, and the connective power of food, values I had held throughout my career, but rarely articulated so clearly. I think it's a beautiful concept, I told her sincerely. And yes, I would be honored to serve as your mentor. The joy that spread across her face reminded me of Michael as a child, receiving unexpected praise or permission for something that mattered deeply to him. In that moment, I fully embraced what had been gradually becoming clear. Alexis was no longer just my son's wife, no longer just a former critic turned student. She had become family in the truest sense, someone I genuinely cared for, whose growth and happiness mattered to me personally. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Your belief in me means everything. Our mentoring relationship added yet another dimension to our Sunday gatherings. Now, alongside cooking lessons and conversations for her memoir, we discussed business plans, analyzed potential locations, debated menu concepts, and projected financial scenarios. Michael joined these discussions eagerly, offering his architectural expertise for the cafe's design and layout. It should reflect both of you, he said one Sunday, sketching ideas as we talked. Caroline's warmth and authenticity, Alexis's storytelling vision, a space that feels both timeless and contemporary, where traditions are honored but not fossilized. Watching my son and his wife collaborate, their different strengths complementing each other perfectly, filled me with a quiet joy. From that disastrous first dinner, with its tension and judgment, had emerged not just reconciliation, but a genuine partnership based on mutual respect and shared passion. In December, just before the holidays, Alexis received the first printed copies of her memoir. The cover featured a striking image, a table set for a meal, half with fine restaurant china and crystal, half with homey ceramics and simple glassware. The same dish, recognizably my coq au vin, plated on both sides. The visual metaphor perfectly captured her journey from valuing presentation over substance to recognizing that true quality transcends context. She presented me with the first copy, inscribed with a message that brought tears to my eyes. To Caroline, who taught me that authenticity tastes better than pretension every time. Thank you for seeing past my masks to the person I could become. With love and eternal gratitude, Alexis. That evening, we celebrated with a special dinner at the Blackbird, not in the main dining room, but in the kitchen itself, at the chef's table where I could cook for them while maintaining conversation. I prepared a multi-course meal that told the story of our journey together, starting with an elevated version of the first dinner I had served Alexis, moving through dishes we had created together during our Sunday cooking sessions, and concluding with a preview of offerings planned for her cafe. As we savored each course, accompanied by wines James had selected to complement the narrative flow of the meal, I marveled at the unexpected gift that had emerged from that painful first encounter. Had Alexis not dismissed my cooking so casually, had she not claimed it made her feel sick while praising the identical food at the Blackbird, we might never have traveled this path of revelation and reconciliation. Her initial judgment, hurtful as it was, had ultimately catalyzed a profound transformation for both of us. "I've been thinking," I said as we lingered over dessert, a trio of traditional sweets reimagined with contemporary techniques, "about what to call your cafe." Alexis looked intrigued. "I've been struggling with that. Nothing seems to capture the essence of what I'm trying to create." "What about full circle?" I suggested. "It speaks to the journey food takes from tradition to innovation and back. Again, to the way recipes travel through generations, cultures, and contexts. And," I added with a smile, "to your personal journey from food critic to food creator." Her face lit up. "It's perfect, especially coming from you, the person who has guided me through this full circle moment." Michael raised his glass. "To full circle, then, and to the two extraordinary women who have taught me that food is never just food. It's story, memory, connection, and love." We clinked glasses, three people who had found their way to genuine understanding and affection despite, or perhaps because of, an inauspicious beginning. The new year brought flurries of activity as Alexis's memoir was released to enthusiastic reviews. Food magazines and culinary websites were particularly drawn to the story of her transformation from pretentious foodie to authentic culinary voice, and to the revelation that the home cooking she had once dismissed was created by the same chef she had effusively praised. "It's a delicious irony," wrote one reviewer, "that makes us question how context shapes our experience of food and of each other." Kingston's memoir challenges us to examine our own culinary pretensions and to recognize the authentic value that exists beyond trendy presentations and exclusive dining rooms. Alexis handled the publicity with grace, always crediting me as the catalyst for her changed perspective. In interviews, she spoke candidly about her former affectations, her working-class background, her journey toward authenticity. The vulnerability and honesty in her narrative resonated with readers who had experienced similar tensions between origin and aspiration, between belonging and becoming. Meanwhile, preparations for Full Circle Cafe accelerated. We found a perfect location in a historic building not far from the Blackbird, a space with soaring ceilings, abundant natural light, and a small courtyard that could serve as outdoor seating in pleasant weather. Michael designed a renovation that honored the building's character while creating an efficient, welcoming environment for both staff and customers. I introduced Alexis to trusted vendors I had worked with for years. Farmers committed to sustainable practices, small batch food artisans, family businesses that had supplied the Blackbird since its earliest days. These relationships, built on mutual respect and shared values, would become the foundation of Full Circle's commitment to quality ingredients with clear provenance. Together, we finalized a menu that reflected both our personal food heritages and our shared belief in honoring culinary traditions. Each dish came with its story, some from Alexis's Pennsylvania Dutch childhood, some from my New England upbringing, others from cultures we had studied and respected from afar. The common thread was authenticity, food made with care, skill, and genuine connection to its origins. As spring approached, bringing the anniversary of that first fateful dinner when Alexis had claimed my cooking made her feel sick, we prepared for the soft opening of Full Circle. The cafe was a beautiful realization of our shared vision, warm and welcoming, neither pretentious nor rustic, a space where food's power to connect and nourish was celebrated in every detail. The morning of the soft opening, I arrived early to find Alexis already in the kitchen, methodically checking equipment and ingredients, her expression a mixture of excitement and anxiety. She looked up as I entered, relief washing over her face. "You came," she said, as if she had harbored some doubt. "Of course I came," I replied, hanging my coat and donning an apron. I wouldn't miss this for the world. We worked side by side, through the morning preparations, baking bread, simmering stocks, preparing components that would come together in the dishes planned for the day. The quiet rhythm of kitchen work, the familiar choreography of two people who had cooked together, countless times created a sense of calm amid the anticipation. "Are you nervous?" I asked as we approached the hour when doors would open to the friends, family, and food writers invited for this preliminary service. Alexis considered the question. "Not about the food," she said finally. "We've tested everything, thoroughly, and I believe in what we're offering. I'm nervous about whether people will understand what we're trying to create here. A place that honors tradition without being stodgy, that tells stories without being preachy, that offers a genuine experience in a world that often values style over substance." I squeezed her shoulder gently. "Those who matter will understand, and they're the ones who will become your community, your loyal customers, your advocates." She nodded, drawing strength from my confidence. "You're right. We're not trying to please everyone, just those who value what we value." Exactly. Remember that night at the Blackbird when you discovered I was Chef Caroline? How shocked you were that the sophisticated cuisine you'd been praising came from the same hands that created the home cooking you'd dismissed? A smile tugged at her lips. How could I forget? Most embarrassing moment of my life. But also the most transformative, I reminded her. It forced you to question your assumptions about what makes food valuable, worthy, impressive. That's what Full Circle offers, an invitation to look beyond the surface, to appreciate the depth and meaning behind each dish. As the first guests began to arrive, Alexis straightened her shoulders, her expression shifting from anxiety to quiet, determination. "Let's welcome them home," she said. The soft opening exceeded our highest hopes. Friends and family responded enthusiastically to both the concept and execution, praising the thoughtfully prepared food and the story cards that accompanied each dish. Food writers appreciated the cafe's clear point of view, its unapologetic celebration of culinary heritage in an era often fixated on novelty and trend. Most meaningfully for me, Alexis stepped fully into her role as creator and host, moving confidently between kitchen and dining room, explaining dishes with genuine passion, receiving feedback with gracious attention. Gone was any trace of the pretension that had characterized our first encounter. In its place was an authentic enthusiasm for food as connection, as story, as vehicle for genuine experience. At the end of the day, when the last guests had departed and we were cleaning up, Alexis pulled me into an unexpected embrace. "Thank you," she whispered fiercely, "for everything, for seeing something in me worth nurturing, despite how awful I was at first, for sharing your knowledge, your passion, your perspective so generously." I returned her hug, thinking of the journey that had brought us to this moment. "Thank you for being brave enough to change, to question your assumptions, to embrace authenticity, even when it meant confronting uncomfortable truths about yourself." We stood like that for a long moment, two women bound together not by marriage certificate or blood relation, but by a shared passion for food's power to nourish both body and soul, to connect people across differences, to tell stories that matter. Later that evening, as Michael, Alexis, and I shared a quiet celebratory dinner at my home, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary path we had traveled. From that painful first dinner, with its dismissive judgment, its casual cruelty, its profound misunderstanding, had emerged not just reconciliation but genuine connection, mutual respect, and shared purpose. "A toast," Michael said, raising his glass, "to the two most important women in my life who found their way from conflict to collaboration, from misunderstanding to mutual admiration. And to the power of food to bridge divides," Alexis added, her eyes bright with emotion. "To tell stories, preserve traditions, and create moments of genuine connection in a world that often settles for shallow substitutes." I raised my glass, heart full of gratitude for this unexpected gift. This family forged, not despite our difficult beginning, but because of it. "To authenticity," I said simply, "in food and in life. May we always have the courage to present ourselves honestly, to see others clearly, and to value substance over appearance." As our glasses clinked together, I thought about how often transformation begins with discomfort, with being misunderstood, underestimated, or dismissively judged. How what appears to be a painful ending can actually be the starting point for something far more beautiful than we could have imagined. Alexis had once claimed my cooking made her feel sick. Now she had built her future on the very traditions and techniques she had dismissed. I had once kept my identities carefully separated, afraid that one might diminish the other. Now I moved fluidly between roles, finding strength and joy in their integration. Neither of us was the same person who had sat at that first uncomfortable dinner. We had been transformed, not instantly, not painlessly, but gradually and authentically, through the courage to face uncomfortable truths, the willingness to see beyond first impressions, and the grace to allow others the space to grow and change. As we lingered over dessert, trading stories and laughter in the warm glow of my kitchen, I savored not just the sweet conclusion to our meal, but the even sweeter outcome of our journey together. From critic to student to colleague to family, Alexis had traveled a path I could never have anticipated that first difficult evening. And I had traveled my own path alongside her, from guarded chef to open-hearted mentor, from compartmentalized identities to integrated wholeness. The meal that had once made her feel sick had become the foundation for a shared passion, a mutual respect, a genuine connection that transcended our differences and honored our common humanity. In the end, that was the true power of food, not as status symbol or performance, but as vehicle for the authenticity, generosity, and love that nourish us all. Full Circle Cafe thrived in its first year, becoming exactly the community gathering place Alexis had envisioned. Each morning, the doors would open to welcome a diverse clientele: young professionals seeking quality over convenience, retirees who appreciated traditions honored with respect, food enthusiasts drawn by the authentic approach to classic dishes. What united them was an appreciation for the stories behind the food, the connection to culinary heritage that made each meal more than just sustenance. I found myself spending more time there than I had initially expected. What began as occasional, mentoring visits gradually evolved into a regular presence, with Tuesdays becoming my dedicated day to cook alongside Alexis in Full Circle's kitchen. These collaborative sessions became known among regular customers as Heritage Tuesdays, featuring special dishes that celebrated the intersection of our culinary backgrounds. Pennsylvania Dutch meets New England, working-class traditions elevated through professional technique. "You know," James teased one evening at the Blackbird, "some might call this a conflict of interest. The renowned chef Caroline moonlighting at another establishment." I laughed, secure enough now to appreciate the irony. "It's not moonlighting when it's family," I replied. "Besides, the Blackbird and Full Circle aren't competitors. They're companions in a larger story." Indeed, an unexpected synergy had developed between the two establishments. Customers who discovered my connection to both would often visit the Blackbird after becoming regulars at Full Circle, curious to experience the more formal expression of my culinary philosophy. Conversely, Blackbird diners who enjoyed the family table events would seek out Full Circle for a more casual, daily expression of food as cultural storytelling. What touched me most deeply was watching Alexis grow into her role as both restaurateur and culinary voice. The woman who had once claimed my cooking made her feel sick had become an eloquent advocate for authenticity in food, for honoring traditions rather than chasing trends, for valuing substance over style. Her memoir had found a devoted readership, particularly among those who recognized their own struggles with authenticity and belonging in her journey. One rainy Tuesday afternoon in April, marking almost 2 years since that first difficult dinner in my home, I arrived at Full Circle to find Alexis in animated conversation with a woman I didn't recognize. They were seated at the corner table, Alexis reserved for meetings, heads bent over papers spread between them. "Caroline!" Alexis waved me over, her face alight with excitement. "I want you to meet someone." I approached, noting the visitor's professional demeanor, crisp blazer, leather portfolio, attentive expression. "This is Elise Werner from PBS," Alexis explained. "She's a producer for their new food and culture series. Elise, this is Caroline Weber, my mother-in-law, mentor, and the secret chef behind the Blackbird." The woman stood, extending her hand with genuine warmth. "It's an honor to meet you, Chef Weber. I've been a fan of the Blackbird for years, though of course I had no idea of your connection until reading Alexis's memoir." I shook her hand, sending Alexis a questioning glance. She hadn't mentioned any media appointments. "Elise has a proposal for us," Alexis said, emphasizing the us with significance. "I think you should hear her out before we head to the kitchen." Intrigued, I joined them at the table. Elise explained that PBS was developing a new series called Heritage Table, exploring the intersection of family traditions, professional cuisine, and cultural identity through food. "When I read Alexis's memoir," she said, "I knew immediately that your story, both your individual journeys and your shared path from conflict to collaboration, would be perfect for our first episode." The contrast between the Blackbird and Full Circle, the interplay of professional and personal cooking traditions, the evolution from misunderstanding to mutual respect, it's exactly the kind of meaningful food narrative we want to share. I felt a familiar instinct to retreat, to protect my privacy, to keep Chef Caroline separate from Caroline Weber. But even as the impulse arose, I recognized it as an echo from a past version of myself, the woman who had needed those boundaries for protection and preservation. "What exactly would this involve?" I asked, neither accepting nor declining. "We'd film in both establishments, of course," Elise explained. "Some cooking demonstrations, interviews about your respective journeys, perhaps a special meal where you collaborate. The focus would be on how food can both divide and unite us, how misunderstandings can transform into deeper connections when we open ourselves to authentic exchange." Alexis watched me carefully, clearly wanting this opportunity, but respectful of my potential reservations. "I told Elise that this would be entirely your decision," she said. "I know how you've valued your privacy over the years." I considered the proposal, thinking about how much had changed since that first dinner when Alexis had dismissed my cooking. How we had both evolved, becoming more integrated, more authentic versions of ourselves. How what had begun as a painful misunderstanding had blossomed into a relationship I now treasured. "There was a time when I would have declined immediately," I acknowledged. "When I needed clear separation between my identities as chef and mother. But that time has passed." I turned to Elise. "I'd be honored to participate, with one condition." "Name it," she replied. "The focus must be on the food and its meaning, not on manufacturing drama from our past conflicts. Our journey from misunderstanding to respect is part of the story, yes, but the heart of it is how food creates connections across differences." Elise nodded enthusiastically. "That's exactly our intention. This isn't reality TV looking for conflict. It's a thoughtful exploration of food as cultural heritage and personal expression. And so we agreed, setting in motion a collaboration I could never have imagined that night when Alexis had looked at my carefully prepared coq au vin and declared it made her feel ill. Life's strange symmetry never ceases to amaze me. How moments of pain can become foundations for unexpected joy. How rejections can open doors to more meaningful acceptance. The filming took place over several weeks, dividing time between the Blackbird full circle and my home kitchen. The PBS crew was respectful and unobtrusive, capturing the genuine warmth of our interactions rather than attempting to manufacture moments for the camera. I found myself increasingly comfortable sharing the story of my dual identity, how I had built the Blackbird while maintaining my privacy, how Alexis's dismissal of my cooking had ultimately led to a more integrated sense of self. On camera, Alexis spoke candidly about her former pretensions, her journey toward authenticity, her gradual understanding that true sophistication lay in appreciation rather than judgment. The moment I discovered that the home cooking I had dismissed was created by the same hands that prepared the restaurant food I had praised, that was a reckoning, she told the interviewer. It forced me to question everything I thought I knew about value, about quality, about what makes food good. And that questioning led to the most important growth of my life. The culmination of the filming was a special dinner we co-created, served at a long table in my backyard garden. The guest list included Michael, of course, along with Alexis's parents, my staff from the Blackbird, employees from Full Circle, and a few regular customers from both establishments who had become friends over the years. Together, Alexis and I prepared a meal that told the story of our journey, beginning with that first fateful dinner, reimagined with the mutual respect we now shared, and moving through dishes that represented key moments in our evolving relationship. For the centerpiece, we prepared two versions of coq au vin, one served on the Blackbird's fine china with restaurant presentation, one served family style in a rustic ceramic dish. Identical in recipe, different only in context. As our guests savored the dual presentation, exclaiming over the subtle differences in experience despite the identical flavors, I caught Alexis's eye across the table. We shared a smile of perfect understanding, acknowledging how far we had come from that first difficult encounter, marveling at the unexpected gifts that had emerged from initial conflict. Later, as twilight settled over the garden and conversations flowed as freely as the wine, Alexis found a moment to speak with me privately. "I've been thinking about that first dinner," she said, her expression thoughtful. "About how quick I was to judge, how desperately I needed to perform sophistication, rather than simply enjoying a beautiful meal prepared with care. We all have our defenses," I replied, "ways we try to protect ourselves from feeling vulnerable or inadequate." She nodded. "But here's what I've realized. When I said your cooking made me feel sick, it wasn't the food at all. It was my own inauthenticity making me ill. The exhaustion of constantly performing, of rejecting parts of myself I thought weren't good enough." She gestured toward the table of guests enjoying the dessert we had prepared together. This, creating real connections, honoring traditions, finding meaning in food beyond status, this is the medicine I needed. Her insight struck me as profound. How often our judgments of others reflect our own internal conflicts. How criticism can mask insecurity. How rejection of what others offer might actually be rejection of parts of ourselves. We've both found healing through this journey, I acknowledged. You in embracing your origins rather than hiding them. Me in integrating my identities rather than compartmentalizing them. From critic to student to collaborator, Alexis mused. Who would have thought that night would lead us here? Indeed, who could have predicted that her casual dismissal of my cooking would ultimately lead to this moment of genuine connection and mutual respect? Life rarely follows the paths we expect, especially when it comes to human relationships. What begins in misunderstanding can evolve into deep appreciation. What starts as conflict can transform into collaboration. What appears to be rejection can become the foundation for more authentic acceptance. The PBS episode aired 3 months later, titled From Conflict to Collaboration, A Culinary Journey. The response exceeded everyone's expectations, resonating with viewers who recognized their own struggles with authenticity, with family dynamics, with the complex relationship between food and identity. We received hundreds of messages from people who had been moved by our story, some who saw themselves in Alexis's journey from pretension to authenticity, others who connected with my evolution from compartmentalized identities to integrated wholeness. Perhaps most meaningfully, we heard from families who had used our story as a starting point for healing their own culinary conflicts. Mothers and daughters who had criticized each other's cooking, in-laws who had dismissed regional or ethnic traditions, professional chefs who had looked down on home cooking only to rediscover its profound value. The success of the episode led to an unexpected opportunity. PBS offered us a recurring segment within the Heritage Table series, featuring collaborative cooking projects that bridged generations, cultures, and culinary approaches. Each month, we would welcome a new guest with their own story of food-related conflict or misunderstanding, working together to create dishes that honored diverse traditions while building new connections. This new chapter brought yet another dimension to our relationship, from adversaries to allies to now public advocates for food as a vehicle for understanding, reconciliation, and genuine connection. Each episode allowed us to extend the lessons of our journey to others struggling with similar divisions, offering not just recipes, but a model for moving from judgment to appreciation, from performance to authenticity. One evening after filming, a particularly moving segment with a grandmother and granddaughter navigating cultural differences through shared cooking, Alexis and I lingered in my kitchen, reflecting on how far we had come. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been so dismissive that first night?" she asked. "If I had just appreciated your cooking for what it was?" I considered her question. "We might have had a pleasant evening. You might have become a polite daughter-in-law, me a cordial mother-in-law. We might have shared occasional family meals without conflict or depth. Instead of this," she gestured between us, acknowledging the genuine bond that had formed, stronger, perhaps because of the difficult ground from which it had grown. "Some connections need to be forged through fire," I observed. "Through the courage to face uncomfortable truths, to acknowledge mistakes, to grow beyond initial impressions." Alexis nodded, understanding in her eyes. "When I said your cooking made me feel sick, I was really saying I felt sick about myself, about the person I was pretending to be, about the parts of my background I was trying to erase. And when I kept Chef Caroline separate from Michael's mom, I was really preventing myself from being fully seen and known. By you, by Michael, even by myself." We had both been hiding in different ways. Alexis behind a veneer of sophistication, me behind carefully maintained boundaries between my identities. The painful collision of our defenses had ultimately led to greater authenticity for us both. Now, several years removed from that first difficult dinner, I can see the hidden gift in what felt like rejection. When Alexis claimed my cooking made her feel sick, she unwittingly initiated a journey that would lead to genuine connection, mutual respect, and shared purpose. What began as an insult became the foundation for growth, for integration, for a relationship neither of us could have imagined that first uncomfortable evening. Food, in the end, is never just food. It's memory and identity, connection and belonging, story and tradition. When we share meals, we share ourselves, our histories, our values, our understanding of what nourishes both body and soul. The dishes we create, whether in professional kitchens or home hearths, carry meaning beyond ingredients and technique. They are vehicles for the authenticity, care, and love that truly satisfy our deepest hunger. Not just for sustenance, but for genuine connection in a world that too often settles for superficial substitutes. From my kitchen to yours, I offer this wisdom, hard-won through years of both professional expertise and personal growth. Cook with honesty, eat with appreciation, share with generosity. And remember that sometimes, the meals that challenge us most ultimately nourish us best, not despite their difficulty, but because of the authentic engagement they demand. In food as in life, the path to genuine satisfaction rarely runs through perfection or performance. It winds instead through authenticity, imperfection, and the courage to be truly seen. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out,